Good morning, Messians. Anyway, enough transliteration for now. The subject for this talk is free will. So, yes, we'll start off in Ephesians chapter 1, and we'll start one time. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 5 says, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good will of his good pleasure of his will. It's talking there about the Lord predestinating us. It's a strange concept. It's also referred to in Romans chapter 8. And you might ask, what does it mean to be predestined? Does it mean it's all predetermined and it doesn't matter what you do anymore? It's all going to happen anyway. Do what you like. I'm fairly sure it doesn't mean that, just in case. But we'll try and explain what this kind of scripture means. Eventually, we'll get to it in a very roundabout manner. But when you talk about things like being predestined and free will and having a choice, you of course think about, in our current time, we've got people who are saying they should be free to choose whether or not to be vaccinated or not. Or you could come up with many other things where people have to make choices and have to make decisions, and they insist on their free will. And obviously, we're not going to get into that today. That would take forever. But it's an interesting thing to think about, free will, and how do you make choices, and what does it even mean? Is it really is it really a freedom that we have, or is it just an illusion? I was listening to a physicist talking on YouTube about free will, and obviously if it's YouTube it's a bit dodgy, but if it's a physicist it's probably okay. But anyway, they were talking about free will, and they were saying there's no such thing as free will, because we're all made up of atoms and electrons and protons and neutrons, and they obey the laws of physics, and they follow a preset path, and it's all predetermined. You toss a coin in the air and it turns up heads. It's predetermined by exactly how you toss the coin and the exact strength that you use and the number of times that if you do it, you could do it over and over and over again, and it still turns up the same way if you use exactly the same initial conditions. And it's so it's predetermined, and it seems like that, of course, at mealtimes. It's predetermined to be heads always. In physics, you can think of things like the planets moving around the sun, and they're in predetermined orbits, and so they don't have any free will. It's all fixed. They go around in the elliptical orbits, and they can't decide, well, today I'll go around in a rectangular orbit. No, it doesn't happen. It's just the way the world is. It's predetermined in a physical sense, and I hope no one's going to ask about quantum mechanics, but we'll go. In classical physics, it's all fixed. You start off. You could imagine starting off from the instant of a Big Bang, everything being predetermined and ending up in a particular way, planets in a particular place and all the rest. That's purely talking from a physical sense. But even when you think about in a natural sense about making choices, when you make a decision, you've got two choices. And one choice is obviously better than the other. They can't be exactly the same. One's going to be better. So you're always going to choose the better choice. So what does it even mean to say you've got free will? You're only going to ever choose one thing. So did you really make a choice? Yes, it's a strange thing to think about. But in the real world, it is a little bit like that. I mean, you hear a little bit about American politics, and If you go to one political party, you don't want to be vaccinated, or if you go to another political party, you do want to be vaccinated. So it's like the people who said, I chose not to get vaccinated, but they didn't choose because they already belonged to a particular party which said that they're not going to be vaccinated. So whatever was inside them, their upbringing or their personality, whatever it was, that sort of drove them to make a particular choice. So they claimed they had a free choice, but they didn't really have a free choice because they didn't. They belonged to that particular party which had that particular option, or that was their personality type, or the way they behave. Or maybe it was just stubbornness that they didn't want to be told what to do. And in the Bible, in 1 Samuel 15, the Lord talks about stubbornness, and he says stubbornness is as iniquity and as idolatry. So stubbornness is not something that we should even contemplate in the Lord. Anyway, we should turn to another scripture. Let's turn to Deuteronomy 30. In Deuteronomy 30, in verse 19, it says, I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. And so here's, in the Old Testament there, the Israelites are given a choice. A real choice. It's not an imaginary choice. The Lord is allowing them their freedom to choose between these two things, and maybe that's the only thing we ever really get to choose, whether to follow the Lord or not follow the Lord. That's a real choice that we can make. So never mind what the physicists say, you do have at least one choice, and that is whether to follow the Lord or not follow the Lord. And so the people there were saying, the choice was choose life. Obviously choosing life seemed better than choosing death, but people still chose the opposite. They chose to go their own way. We should turn to the equivalent passage in the New Testament, in Romans chapter 6. We have to be a little bit careful when we look at the Old Testament and try and transliterate that into the New Testament. In Romans chapter 6 and verse 16, it says, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slaves whom you obey, whether of sin leading to death or of obedience leading to righteousness? But God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered. And having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. So again, there's this choice, life or death, being a slave of sin or a slave of righteousness, and that's the choice that you do have. But once you've made that choice, there's not much left. It's to a large degree, it's predetermined what's going to happen, because if you're a slave to sin, you're going to be bound up by sin. It's going to drive you, it's going to motivate you, it's going to control you. And you see that in its most extreme form in people who are suffering from one kind of addiction or another, like gambling or drugs or alcohol or cigarettes, that it's the addiction that controls them, and they're a slave of those things. But there are lots more subtle ways where sin can be their taskmaster, a very harsh slave master over them. And the end result is always bad. Even in the natural sense, sin is a dreadful thing, and you want to be free from that. We'll go on to verse 19. It says there, I speak in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh. And we can translate it and say, Paul is saying, I've dumbed it down for you because you're thick I speak in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh, for just as you presented your members as slaves of uncleanness and of lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves of righteousness for holiness. For when you were slaves of sin, you were free in regard of righteousness. And now that we're slaves of righteousness, we're no longer free to do whatever we like. We're free to do what the Lord wants us to do, and that's going to be different for each one of us. We're all individuals, except those that aren't. But we're all different. The Lord's given us different talents. So although we're all slaves of righteousness, that might manifest itself in different ways. We're all, whether it's in terms of how you give talks or presentations or music, or what you do in terms of serving the brethren or outreaching, all the different kinds of things that you do in the Lord. That's part of your personality and part of your makeup. But now it's as part of a slave of righteousness instead of a slave of sin. We can finish off in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. First Corinthians chapter 2 verse 16. For who has known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him? For we have the mind of Christ. So we now have the mind of Christ. We now have the desires, the thoughts, whatever drives an individual is what drove Christ. We now have inside us. If we go back one verse to verse 15. But he who is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is righteously judged by no one. He who spiritually judges all things. That means judging is about deciding, about making decisions, about doing the right thing, making choices. Your judgment is now the way that we have the mind of Christ. So I'll leave those thoughts there.
Amen.